In this video, we'll talk about length, area, volume, and dimension. Let's start with length. Length is a one-dimensional object. We often measure it using things like miles and inches, feet, even kilometers if we're using metric. And you're often talking about things like the perimeter or circumference, or even like the distance between two locations. That is a form of length, because it's only going in one dimension. Now let's say we have a farmer that wants to build a fence in a new rectangular field that they purchased. The field's approximately 3 miles by 5 miles. How many feet of fence will be needed to build a fence around the entire field? Now when we read that, we have to think, what are we dealing with? Area, volume, length? The key here is it's fenced around the entire field. Going around is measuring a length. It's measuring the perimeter of this rectangular field. And since it's rectangular, I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I'm going to label my sides. I know that 2 of the sides will be 5 miles, and the other 2 will be 3 miles. So that when I add them all together, I would get that there's 16 miles for the perimeter. That's how much fence would be needed. However, it's important to read the question carefully. The question doesn't want how many miles of fence, it wants to know how many feet, because you buy rolls of fence in feet, not miles. So I need to convert the 16 miles to feet. So think about our chain of movement. We need to go from miles to feet. So I have the 16 miles to 1, and I need to simplify out my miles. The relationship there is that I know that there's 5,280 feet to 1 mile. And when I multiply them together, I see that my units of miles will simplify to 1, leaving me just with feet as a unit. And when multiplied, that's 84,480 feet. So the farmer will need 84,480 feet just to fence the entire field. Now, beyond length, we have area. We've moved to 2 dimensions, a length and a width. We measure these in square units, or in acres, or even hectares in locations around the world. We're often looking at the area of shapes, or even if you think about in a real world situation, how much space does a rug cover? Or how much carpet do I need in a room to make sure the room is fully carpeted? That's measurements of area. Let's go back to our farmer. Now that we have this newly fenced field, the farmer wants to put in their herd of cattle. But each cow needs at least 100,000 square feet, and they have a herd of 4,000 cattle. Will they fit in the field? So when we see that a cow needs 100,000 square feet, that unit of measurement tells us we're dealing with area. So the first thing we should do is really find out what's the area of the field itself. So we still have the rectangular field that's at 5 miles by 3 miles, and area of a rectangle is length by width. That means 5 times 3 is 15, and miles by miles gives me the square miles. But again, look at what I'm comparing it to. I'm comparing it to square feet. So I need to convert my square miles to square feet. And if I think about that, I have the 15 square miles to 1, and the unit that I have to use is the idea of feet to miles. I know there's 5,200 feet to 1 mile, so if I take each of those quantities and square them, that will give me square feet to square miles. So I have to pay attention. It's not just feet squared, it's that entire quantity squared. So that's 5,280 feet times 5,280 feet. And that's how I get feet times feet, which gives me square feet. And that gives me 418,176,000 square feet. That's a lot of space. But we need to compare it to how much space is needed for the cattle. So if I think about, now that I know the area of the field, how much area is needed for cattle? I'm going to use the whole chain of movement again here to compare what 1 cow needs to what 4,000 cows need. So if I think about that 1 cow needs 100,000 square feet, and I'll multiply that by 4,000 cows, if I think about cows a unit of measure, my cows simplify, leave me just with the square feet for the cow's amount of area needed. And that would be 400 million square feet. So that's less than the area of the field. So yeah, the herd will fit. More so, you have 18 million square feet left still that you could add to the herd if needed. Now, the third measurement is volume. Here we're dealing with length, width, and now a height to give us that third dimension. We measure this in cubic units, like cubic feet, but there's also liters, gallons, and ounces and other measurements as well. Think about like a gallon of milk, that's a liquid in a container, or you buy quarts of oil for your car. We also think about like when we need to package something to ship, we may need to know how much of packing peanuts we need to keep the item safe. Let's go back to our farmer one more time, who wants to build rectangular water containers for their cattle in the newly fenced field. Now, if each container is 3 feet wide by 5 feet long by 2 feet tall, how many cubic inches of water can the container hold? Now, here we see that word cubic inches of water. As soon as we see that, we know we're dealing with a volume measurement. So we're dealing with a rectangular container, so it's a rectangular prism. We need the length, the width, and the height, which are provided to us. And we label them on our rectangular prism. And if you mix up where you put the 5 and the 3 in comparison, it's not a big deal because we're dealing with the volume. In volume, we do length times width times height. So it's multiplication, order doesn't matter. That will give us 30 cubic feet, because feet times feet times feet. However, we need to pay attention, that's not the units that were requested. The problem asks how many cubic inches. So we need to convert the cubic feet into cubic inches. So we have the 30 cubic feet over 1, and we're going to use that relationship of 12 inches to 1 foot, but in this case, we need to take each of those terms and cube them. 12 inches cubed means 12 inches times 12 inches times 12 inches. Just like 1 foot cubed means 1 foot times 1 foot times 1 foot. It's just 1 cubed is 1, which is why you don't necessarily see the parentheses around it in the same way. But if I multiply those terms, I would end up with 51,840 cubic inches in each container.